Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bad Luck Gamer, and yes, it's a Lancer video. Who knew? It's gonna be a bit short-lived, as there's a lot of stuff coming out in the next couple weeks, and I have a lot to cover. But I did want to cover at least the new mech that came out. Well, actually, there's a few new mech frames, but this is the full license that came out in the newest operation to come out for Lancer, which is Winter Scar. That's going to be the Gilgamesh. The Gilgamesh is such an interesting frame because its design purpose is to use charges and limited use systems is the biggest part of the Gilgamesh. It's designed to be replaceable, to have lots of systems, and more importantly, you're going to want a massive amount of engineering because you're going to want to have as much charges or limited use systems on your mech as possible. So creating a very interesting design, and it's a striker frame, which is really cool, as it offers, I think, a very unique style of play. But let's go ahead and take a look at what the Gilgamesh has to offer so you can decide for yourself whether it's worth investing in. So first up, looking at the stats here, we do have a okay tanky mech. It's got 8 HP, which is average, and 1 armor, which is average as well, making it decent against lighter fire of weapons, though it doesn't hold up against any medium or heavier weapons. Its evasion is 8 and its E-defense is 8, which are both average. Its heat capacity is above average, though, at 7, with a pretty decent sensor range. It is average, but there are a lot of mechs that have way less sensor range. And a Harrison Armory mech that has some decent sensors is pretty good, honestly. Its repair capacity is surprisingly lower than I would expect. I would think it would be 5 or even 6, considering the whole point of the mech is it's supposed to be easy to replace its parts. But it's still on the average end of repair capacity. Its save target is 11, which is very strange, because I don't know if there's really all that much save target-wise this mech has to offer, other than, I guess, grenades and a lot of other kind of features like mines and everything that use a lot of saves are limited systems. So I guess it does make sense. It just stood out to me a little bit when I was looking through the stats. Its speed is actually pretty good at 4, and its system points are a little bit below average, but many mechs have 6 system points. Honestly, if I was to stat out a Gilgamesh specifically, I would go for a lot of engineering and a lot of system points, as the biggest thing is limited systems and having as many systems as you can on your mech. Now, its traits, on the other hand, are very interesting. So, first we have load-bearing hardpoints. All limited systems and weapons equipped to the Gilgamesh gain +1 charge. So this is, I don't know if charge was really commonly used in the books before, but I guess now charges is what we refer to the limited number of a particular system. So +1 charge, that's really, really good. There are some really good guns that have charges that you can use that this makes a lot of good use of. Also, there's locked and loaded. Now, this one is also really good and kind of the core mechanic of the Gilgamesh, because it starts off at essentially a value of 6, and then each time you use a limited charge, you reduce that loadout die by 1, the value of the whatever you're using, whether it's a die or just like a chart you're using. It goes down by 1 every time you use a limited system, which means you could do this 2, even 3 times around potentially. And when the loadout die reaches 1, you may reset it to 6 to reroll 1 attack, check, or save, though the second result must be kept. The value of the loadout die persists between scenes, but resets to 6 whenever you perform a full repair. So the big thing about this is you get essentially a more accurate mech the more you use your loaded systems, because you just get to re-roll an attack, though you can do it for checks and saves as well. Attacks, I think, is what's going to be most commonly used for. 6 charges is quite a bit. Honestly, it'd take you 2 rounds to get 1 use of this particular ability, which is a little unfortunate in my eyes. But one of the things that I think is really cool about it is it's something that you're already going to want to do because the mech supports it so much. So it just enhances the build already. I think it's a very powerful trait, though the Gilgamesh doesn't have, I think, some of the punching power that some of the other striker mechs have. Now, to look at the mounts, we have a main mount, a flex mount, and a heavy mount. pretty standard affair. Main mount is kind of whatever. Just put a good main weapon on, which we will actually find here in the license soon. And I love the flex mount and a heavy mount. I'm all for any mechs that have as many mounts as possible because that gives you as many weapons as you can get. So honestly, the Gilgamesh is very well suited for being a striker just because it has a use for a bunch of limited systems that probably do damage, and it can use a variety of weapons or even a super heavy if you want to go that far. So now let's talk about Exoframe engineering, which is its core system. First, there's a passive, which is called Exoframe engineering. Duh. But what it does is, once per scene, as a free action, you can either regain half of your total HP or repair a destroyed weapon or system. Now, it does have an additional feature where even if you don't use this ability during a battle, whenever you do your next rest, even if it's not a long rest, for instance, you regain all HP or automatically repair a destroyed weapon or system, which is pretty cool. And in addition to this, using this ability counts as expending a limited charge, which means there is a free action to give you a little bit more unlimited charge use in your round. As a general feature, this is really good. Honestly, if the Everest was kind of designed to be a full-on mech rather than a starter mech frame, which don't get me wrong, the Everest is good, I feel like it would have this kind of ability. It's easy to replace functionality. It's a striker, all kinds of stuff. I think it's really cool. And being able to restore half your total HP means investing in some hull in your Gilgamesh, or just having Gilgamesh on top of a defender frame you might be using, is a really solid choice because that can undo a lot that an enemy could do to you in a combat, which is really solid. Then we have the active system, which is Exo Amplification. Now, this is a protocol, which you can kind of see over here behind my shoulder. And this essentially just makes your mech go from being kind of screwed over by any kind of debuffs, whatever, to just instantly ready to go. So you gain immunity to all conditions not caused by your own systems, talents, or whatever until the end of your next turn. And until the end of your next turn, you automatically clear all such conditions that your mech already have, even such conditions that you normally couldn't clear, which is really, really cool. You also clear the exposed condition. You stand from prone and gain a grit +4 overshield. And at the end of your next turn, your overshield falls off. You can even use this protocol even if you're not allowed to act, like from being stunned. Also, this also counts as the use of a limited system during combat. Now, something in Winter Scar that was very interesting was a lot of the actives for the core powers actually were efficient, which means that you just got your core power back after every combat. And I'm surprised this mech of all mechs didn't get that same feature, which is very interesting. But Exo Amplification is a core power that you're going to use if you're in a really bad situation more often than not, though you could always pop it for an overshield or to stand from prone. More often, you're going to be in a situation where you're getting completely screwed over, though there might also be some interesting use of, like, it says only conditions that you caused with your own systems or talents, but not what your allies do. So your ally might hit you with something that stuns everyone in an area, but then you can just use this as a protocol, and boom, now you can act when all the enemies surrounding you could not. So honestly, the Gilgamesh has some very interesting tech that you can use to do some very cool things during a combat. Overall, the Gilgamesh is a very interesting mech. I would say it's kind of average in many aspects, and I don't think as a striker frame, it's particularly all that special as far as like striker potential. But I will say this has one of the more unique playstyle choices you can make amongst striker frames. So overall, I think the Gilgamesh is really cool. Now, it does come with its own license, which we're going to look at here in just a moment. But before we do, if you enjoy this content, please leave a like on the video. In fact, if you're watching any Lancer content out there, try to leave a like as much as you can because I want more people to know about Lancer. And with new books coming out and with a new like retail release of a physical book, I feel like Lancer has a lot of potential to really get out there. So helping out any channels increases its general visibility. But if you like my content specifically, then why don't you subscribe? Check it out. I talk about all kinds of different tabletop content in addition to Lancer. I also talk about Pathfinder, Starfinder, Fabula Ultima. I'm going to be covering the Cosmere RPG soon. So if you want to have a nice one-stop shop for all kinds of things tabletop related, I recommend subscribing to this channel specifically. And if we're talking about supporting the channel, hey, I am working with Into the AM to give some shirts out. We've actually had a lot of people who've been going and using my link down in the description below to get some really nice t-shirts. This has been through the wash quite a few times at this point now, and it's still holding on strong. The cotton material has not shrunk on me at all, which is really solid. But the biggest thing, honestly, they got this killer deal where you can get 3 shirts for around $60. But if you use my code in the description, you get that 10% on that deal, making each of the shirts essentially less than $20. If you like graphic tees like I do, I think that's a really stellar deal you can get with them. So that being the case, check it out down in the description below. But hey, let's go ahead and get to the Gilgamesh now. Starting off, we have a heavy rifle, which is really cool. I don't think there are many heavy rifles in the game. And making this mech already have a 15 range gun, I mean, this already works with a lot of other like artillery range mechs. So this one is pretty cool. Now, it is a limited weapon. You can see here as limited 3, but using the weapon actually does not expend the charges necessarily. So it says here, you may attack with this weapon without expending or requiring charges. So even if you do expend them, you still don't need to worry about it. And this weapon can be destroyed due to critical damage or other effects, even if it has no charges remaining, which is one of those kind of rules that a lot of people tend to forget, where if something is out of charges, technically it can't be targeted when you structure down, for instance. This gun can be, but that's okay for the Gilgamesh if you're using it with the Gilgamesh. Now, if you do choose to expend a charge, you can expend up to 3 charges, and each charge can give your weapon +2 reliable, or on hit, push the target plus 1 space in any direction. And something that I find interesting here, it should say and or, because I don't know if you spend like 3 charges, you could split it between reliable and the push. For instance, the wording seems to imply that you can't, but I don't know why you couldn't, honestly. And one of the really cool things about this particular rifle is if you have a lot of engineering, which gives you a lot of charges, or are using the Gilgamesh, just dumping a bunch of reliable on this gun is really good. Up to a +6 reliable on a weapon that already does a D6 +3 damage is really good. And if you're using the Gilgamesh, you're just ticking your loaded die down until eventually you just get to roll again on another attack roll, which makes it really, really good. So the Gilgamesh, I think, gets the most benefit out of this one, but any build you're using that uses a lot of engineering, I think can really benefit from use of the Legionnaire battle rifle. And it's a cool heavy weapon, which there are a lot of mechs out there that have a nice heavy slot open that typically gets filled with either a super heavy or maybe something else, and I think this provides a really good long-range option. Now, this emergency repair module system we can get here at the first rank, I'm not as big of a fan of, even though it is pretty good. Now, it's a 1-point system, which is the thing that makes it honestly good, but what it does is whenever you or an adjacent ally braces, you can expend 1 charge and spend 1 of your repairs to restore that character's HP to full immediately after they take the damage from the triggering attack. If that character took structure damage from the triggering attack, the roll is 1 less on the die for the structure, which means it can go to 0, which does nothing. That's really cool. What I don't like about this one is it's based on bracing. Players are so adverse to bracing because you can't really do anything with your next turn. Bracing is really only in situations where it's going to structure you out in a really bad way. And a lot of players would more take the structure than anything. So I feel like this just doesn't come up enough. But I do think it has some really interesting implications when you stack it up with, like, you're playing a heavy defender frame, or you're playing something like the Baylor, who's all about restoring a bunch of HP or having a bunch of hull points to use. And just bracing to get all that HP back rather than a full stabilize, I mean, you kind of just use your whole next turn regardless anyway, right? So I feel like this is actually not a bad way to do it. And some mechs, like the White Witch, actually benefit with bracing in general. So I feel like this system is really good. For the Gilgamesh, if you're investing a lot into your hull, sure. But I feel like this is just better on a lot of other frames. Now we're being spoiled for weapons as we have another weapon here at the second rank along with the Gilgamesh. We have the Super Thermal Blade. Now this one has the same stipulations that the Legionnaire Battle Rifle had, where you can use this weapon whether it has charges or not, and it can be destroyed if it has 0 charges. But now, on hit, once per round, if you're in the danger zone, you may expend one of the charges, which it starts with 2, to deal +3 heat. Now, if you're not in the danger zone, you may take 3 heat to expend a charge for the same effect. I really like this one because Super Thermal Blade 1 is one of the cooler ways to deal a bunch of heat damage to an enemy, and it does energy on top of that. Very solid. Also, AP. Also, it's a limited weapon, which means it stacks super well with the Gilgamesh. And it's just a main weapon. A main weapon that does a D6 energy and 1 heat flat, not even including expending charges to do the +3 heat to do a maximum, or to do 4 heat. For a main weapon, that's a massive amount of damage. I think overall, the Super Thermal Blade is insanely good. And the fact that you can actually take heat to then be able to expend a charge is really good, because just taking heat, some mechs just want to get into the danger zone. I think the Enkidu, for instance, could do really well with this one. So overall, the Super Thermal Blade, I think, is really, really good. And when you get this here just at the second rank of the license, so along with the Gilgamesh, you get an insanely good weapon. I think overall, that's a very value buy. And here at rank 2, we have the Utility Drone. Now, I'm a little bit mixed on this one personally, but it says you can expend 1 to 2 charges to deploy that many utility drones to free spaces within sensors where they each create a burst 2 area. Now, I do love that you can drop multiple drones at once. I think that's really cool. And if you're going the drone shepherd style of build with those talents, I think this is really good. Now, hostile characters within this area must make all checks and saves with a +1 difficulty, and all allied characters within the area get a +1 accuracy on all checks and saves. This effect does not stack with other utility drones, so you can't layer them up. So these drones can be redeployed, but they cannot be recalled at the end of the scene. So you're going to have to replace this system. But this is another limited charge system, which works really, really well with the Gilgamesh. And for only 2 system points, incredibly solid. And pretty much you can just do this multiple times to create multiple safe areas for your allies to give them some extra bonus on all their checks and saves. I really do like the utility drone. I feel like, 1, the drones are very obvious targets to hit. And 2, if you're talking about the Gilgamesh specifically, I don't know if I'd use a utility drone slot for it. Instead, I would go for like grenades or something. But if you're going a support route, this is a really good drone to have in your kit. And the fact that you can drop multiples is actually really cool. I'm actually thinking about using the utility drone on my Big Sal build I'm working on myself. So, overall, I would say this is a pretty good system. All right, now at rank 3, we have another weapon. So good. I'm so happy we get so many weapons here. And more specifically, it's a super heavy Nexus weapon. I love Nexus weapons. I think they're really cool. And this one is probably the coolest Nexus weapon I've seen in the game so far. It's really solid. Now, it's very expensive because, 1, it's super heavy Nexus. So it's going to take 2 of your weapon mount slots, and it's 2 system points. Now, its damage is pretty okay. 3d6 damage is nothing to sniff at, and the range is pretty good too. The main benefit, though, is once per round after attacking with this weapon, you can expend one of its charges as a free action to have essentially a Legion drone deployed. And similarly to some of the other charge-based weapons that we've had before, this one can be used whether it has charges or not, and can be destroyed whether it has charges or not. So the Legion drone is really interesting because as a protocol, you can move each deployed Legion drone you control up to 3 spaces and order each of them to perform one of the follow commands. The suppression protocol, you choose a hostile character within range 5 of the drone, and your attacks with the Legion Nexus against that target gain +1 accuracy until the end of your next turn. With the assault position, a hostile character that's adjacent to one of the drones must pass a hull save or be knocked back 1 space and knocked prone. Until the start of your next turn, the drone counts as a size 1 and adjacent allies can use this as hard cover. Now, for each deployed Legion drone you control, the Legion Nexus deals +2 damage on hit to a maximum of +3, or +6, 3 times +6. Legion drones cannot be recalled and expire at the end of the scene. So yeah, this is a smart weapon. It's limited 3, so it already comes with 3 drones out the gate without even investing into your engineering. Now, using this weapon does do 2 heat to yourself. That's not necessarily a big deal, especially because each Legion drone increasing the amount of damage you can potentially deal with this weapon to a 3d6 +6, plus having drones, which makes this really, really good. Like, I've been wanting to make a really good drone build for a long time, and the Gilgamesh is providing me everything I need to really do it. I don't know if I'm going to use it with the Gilgamesh, but the Legion Nexus, I think, is a really interesting weapon I'm going to put on some other frames I'm working on. So that being said, the Legion Nexus is insanely cool. I think this is really fun. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that can be done. But more importantly, if you're using the Drone Commander, Drone Shepherd build, this is insanely powerful because you can utilize these drones with many of the talents from that particular talent tree. So yeah, I think this is a really, really good weapon that they've added here, and I'm super hyped for it. And the final system that we have here for the Gilgamesh is the spear charges, which by spear, they mean spear rockets. Yeah, you get a rocket launcher, which is really good. So the anti-armor rocket just allows you to fire a rocket as a quick action, targeting a single character within range 10. Your target must then pass an agility save or take 6 armor-piercing explosive damage, and even if they succeed, they take half that amount of damage. You can also deploy a Loitering Payload. Now, this one is interesting, but it doesn't work, I think, as well with the Gilgamesh. I guess it does because you have higher saves, so it's easier to get systems that can move enemies into certain positions. But more or less what it does is you deploy this Loitering Payload as a mine, and it deploys within a free space within range 3 of you, essentially. It then establishes a burst 2 area. Now, when it's deployed, this mine's area cannot overlap with any hostile characters currently. So that means you need to move them onto it, or they need to move onto it in some way or form. Now, this one doesn't just blow up whenever someone just walks across it, but instead, the next time a hostile character voluntarily moves more than 1 space while within this area, and up to 10 spaces high, you can't really see that because it's above my head here. There you go. The payload immediately launches itself at them and detonating. They must pass an agility save or take 2d6 armor-piercing explosive damage, and they immediately stop and lose all remaining movement for that action. On a success, they take half the damage only. Failing to disarm this mine also causes it to detonate against the character. A character can only trigger 1 Loitering Payload per turn. So, essentially, this one is very interesting. Now, I like just the basic quick action anti-armor rocket. Good to go. But the Loitering Payload is really good, and you can use it with a lot of allies. Now, characters do need to voluntarily move from the space, but it's a burst 2 area. You just have to drop the enemy in the middle of it, and then they have to choose either move 1 space at a time, tiptoe out, or go more than that and blow it up. Now, of course, they could always try to disarm the mine, but if they fail, they do get blown up for it. So I do think that the Loitering Payload is interesting and has some interesting tech you can kind of use with it. But I think more than anything, just the anti-armor rocket alone is really good. I mean, it's just a quick action, deal damage with an agility save versus an attack roll. Good to go. And because this is 3 system points, it's a little expensive for just that part of it. So I will say this one system's overall pretty okay. Now, it's insanely good against heavy armored mechs, and I think that's kind of the point of the spear charges. So having this just on hand would be good, but 3 system points for something you want on hand, I don't know if I could justify normally. So it depends on your mission. I feel like there's a lot of situations where this one is really good. By the way, it's also a limited system, limited 2, which is obvious. But I do want to state that if you have either the Gilgamesh or any mech that has a good amount of engineering, this is a really good anti-armor option for you if you have the system points to support it. So overall, I'm going to say this one is generally okay. It's better than some of the other final systems I look at with some of these licenses where they're just honestly bad or I can't really justify them. This one is generally like, I could see its uses. It's not amazing for rank 3, but I could see its uses for sure. And yeah, that's going to be the Gilgamesh. Now, I know I covered the Gilgamesh before I finished off. I believe I still need to cover the Atlas. Yeah, I think it's the Atlas and the Emperor. I think the last 2 I have yet to cover. I think I've covered everything else up until this point. But because it's brand new, I wanted to bring it to y'all here. I still have a couple more mechs. And as well, I will be covering the new variant frames, one of which we got from the Napoleon, the Kutuzov frame, and another one that we got from the Manticore, which is the Lycan frame. And my favorite, actually, which is the Amber Phantom frame from the Metal Mark license. So that one is going to be really cool to look into. So stay tuned for all of that. But that's going to be it for me. Thank y'all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Leave the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.